So as of the making of this video in September 2020, YouTube has a new major change to the platform. Now, while this isn't necessarily a YouTube policy change, YouTube is expanding the way that its machine learning, its algorithm, actually categorizes mature content on YouTube. And so this is going to involve age restrictions for mature content that is suited to an audience over 18. And as usual, whenever these major platform issues happen and there are changes, content creators get a little bit nervous. So today we're going to answer all of your questions about these new changes and how mature content is handled on the platform, what these age restrictions mean for you. And so let's jump into the video. Hey everybody, this is Roberto Blake helping you create something awesome today. Welcome back to the channel. So for the new people here, my name is Roberto Blake. I'm a creative entrepreneur, public speaker, and here on YouTube, I teach you how to monetize and market yourself. So if you're into that, make sure you subscribe. Today, we are talking about a new change to YouTube. Yes, another one in 2020. And this one is around the concept of age-restricted content and how things have changed on YouTube. And there are some specific ways this could impact you as a content creator. So I want to answer the main questions I know you're going to have. Is this going to affect your views and your video performance? How is this going to affect YouTube monetization and how you get paid as a content creator? How can you appeal this if the YouTube algorithm manages to get it wrong somehow and flags your video incorrectly? How is age-restricted content different from COPPA and what we saw with children's programming on YouTube? And then of course, finally, what does this mean for the future of the YouTube platform? I'm gonna take these one at a time. So let's go ahead and get to the first one. How does this affect you and your video performance as a YouTube content creator? When it comes to these age-restricted videos, it's talking about content that it feels isn't suitable for people under 18 on the platform. Typically, this is your usual suspects. It's your usual suspects in terms of, extreme profanity, nudity, suggestive topics, anything that is overly sexual in nature, and anything that might be also, realistic violence rather than fantasy violence. Now, I think most people, at least people who aren't making bad faith arguments, can agree that this is content that you probably would want to make sure that people under the age of 18, that, minors, probably aren't watching on YouTube. And with a very large portion of the viewing audience of YouTube being people under 18, it means that content that fits this criteria would simply get less views. It would get less distribution. Age-restricted and age-gated content is a little bit of a mystery on YouTube. Now, while I do believe the community guidelines aren't really that vague, and a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I would say that they're a lot more clear and a lot more lenient than most of the HR policies at any place I ever used to work at. They're probably more lenient than the student code of conduct at any school you probably attended. So I really don't think that YouTube's overall policies are that bad when I compare it to what it'd be like to look at a regular employment contract. A lot of those things are really strict, and you'd be shocked what's in most people's employment agreements. It seems like a topic for another video. But my point is that the age-restricted content, we don't know a lot about how that content is treated currently in YouTube systems, but we do know that it results in less views on the platform. I do know that when I've talked to some of my clients, I have coaching clients that have done YouTube channel reviews with them. When we've looked at content that has been age restricted, that we know doesn't show up in restricted mode in YouTube, when we've looked at the impressions and distribution of that content, whenever it gets hit with that, we've seen it flatline. And I've seen that time and time again, and it's been pretty consistent. Now, some people have asked, why can't YouTube just put a warning label or put kind of like one of those like PG-13 ratings or something like that across the videos? And while I think that would be great, I don't think it actually addresses a lot of the main issues, because a lot of times YouTube doesn't just do these things because it wants to. I actually feel that a lot of this is trying to comply with certain regulations or laws that have come forward. And so when you're in that situation, sometimes those kind of solutions just aren't going to meet the legal mandate. Another thing that's going to happen to these videos that are restricted is they won't be viewable in embedded websites without someone logging in and verifying their age. And the verification aspect of it is the really interesting thing that leads me to believe that this has to do with some of the regulations that we see coming forward with social media as a whole, I think that we're in for more of this. I've alluded to this before whenever we've talked about COPPA here on YouTube, and I've just talked about my general concerns about government regulation of these social media platforms. You saw a lot of what happened with the involvement with the government and TikTok, and so here we are again. Let's talk about YouTube monetization. When it comes to YouTube monetization, this is how a lot of content creators make their living here on the platform. So there's a lot of concerns that this will be impacted. And according to the policy changes that we see, if you are age restricted in terms of this content, you're likely going to receive limited or no ads, which means essentially you're going to be demonetized on those particular videos. And this is very concerning because of the fact that content creators make a living usually off of their YouTube ad revenue. Now, the reason a lot of content creators are concerned about this is because they tend to rely on their ad revenue, if not for the majority of their income, from a sizable chunk of it, particularly if they are doing what could be considered edgy or borderline content, just because they don't have as many revenue streams for that content. They don't have sponsors as easily lined up, and so on and so forth. So this really feels like a crackdown for those type of content creators, and those feelings are valid, but I don't think that's really the intent here. I just think that it's an unintended consequence. There will be people who will argue that it's a feature and not a bug. I think that those are bad faith arguments. I think that the more hands-off these platforms could be, the more they would like to be. I don't really think that anybody relishes micromanaging that much. In my opinion, the bottom line here is that edgy and borderline content is just going to be less and less profitable as time goes on, because we're going to see more platform crackdowns. We're going to see the platforms become a lot more risk adverse and conservative, and we also are probably going to see more regulations influence social media platforms as times go on. And this is not going to be limited to larger publicly traded companies. It's going to be across the board, because it's going to come from governments, whether it's the US or whether it's anybody else in the international community. You're going to see this happen as a trend now that the boomer generation takes social media seriously and recognizes its legitimacy. Now, with regard to the appeals process, what do you do when YouTube gets this wrong? And make no mistake, they're anticipating mistakes happening, and I think that they should. In general, machine learning is never going to be 100% reliable, and when it does become 100% reliable, well, it's probably gonna get rid of all of us. And on that day, I just want our robot overlords to remember my loyal service to the Empire and that I've been on their side this entire time. Skynet be praised. But in all seriousness, the appeals process for this is something that is really important to take note of. Now, YouTube has said that in the case of these appeals, that they will be done by human reviewers and not bots, not the algorithms, but the initial flagging is going to be done by the algorithms. So just kind of keep that in mind and take that with a grain of salt. And also, a human reviewer doesn't necessarily guarantee a better outcome. You're still relying on that person's individual judgment and sense of nuance. A lot of creators have argued that they want and insist upon absolute human reviewers and moderators for everything. That's not realistic. There are 500 hours of content uploaded to YouTube every minute of every day, I think is the statistic we're seeing. So I'm really not seeing how that's possible. 500 hours of content uploaded every minute of every day. That's not possible. That's not scalable. There are too many people on this platform to make human reviewers a realistic thing for every issue that creators have. And I know why people think that that would be an answer, but also human beings are flawed and they can be biased. Or sometimes you could just get somebody who's having a bad day or someone who's not good at their job. In a weird way, to be honest with you, I trust machines more. Again, you hear that, Skynet? I trust machines more. What I would like to see YouTube implement is, if you're going to have human reviewers and moderators at some point in the process, I would like them to also leave their operating number so that there's a way to trace this and tie back accountability, and that so we as content creators can actually feel like there was a human being involved in the process, and that we have some method of recourse when we say, hey, this wasn't right, or we still don't agree with this review. Could you look into and check this with reviewer number 55187? I think just having a reviewer operating number would be good. This is actually standard operating procedure at a lot of companies and a lot of call centers where customer service is done. So I don't see a reason they can't implement that. And I think that it would just be one more layer of transparency with the community. I understand that they don't want to reveal the overall process for reviews and moderation. They feel that bad actors could abuse that. I'm trying to figure out in what ways they could, and if there's any way to just be transparent about the process without revealing proprietary information, because I just feel like that would go a long way with the community. There's a lot of distrust, and so I think when you can be transparent, it eliminates a lot of those problems or assumptions. Not all of them, but enough of them. Now, I do want to point out that I think it's important to also protect employee privacy for a lot of reasons, but the reality is that there are people in the community, hopefully not in my community, but maybe some people who don't typically watch the channel who are subscribed here, and those people know who they are. There's a lot of trash people who go onto Twitter and harass YouTube employees at every turn, every time they have an issue. And if you're doing that, in my opinion, you're a piece of garbage. Yeah, I said it. Sorry, not sorry. So how is this different than COPPA? Well, COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, that had to do with children under 13. This is pertaining to individuals under 18. And one of the key differences here is that this content would be restricted from people under 18, whereas any content that's classified as children's programming under COPPA is still accessible to everyone on the platform. It just loses some features. The thing that these both have in common, however, is the fact that they would be negatively impacted in terms of views and discoverability, but in very different and specific ways. And the thing is, again, any content creators that are either creating children's programming or programming that is explicitly for an audience over 18, for the reasons that we talked about earlier, I think these content creators obviously are going to see a significant drop in views, a significant drop in ad revenue, and that will feel disproportionate and unfair. And those feelings from those creators are valid. So what are my final thoughts on all of this? I don't think there's a single content creator who is cheering for this decision, but I also think the majority of content creators aren't going to be affected by it. The people who are affected by it have every reason to be upset about this, and also we'll have to wait and see how accurate this system plays out. I know a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth about the YouTube AI, the algorithms, but ultimately the machine learning on YouTube, at least from a viewer's perspective, gets more right than wrong when it comes to the viewers, and the viewers come first more than anything. On top of that, for most content creators, it's not been this negative crucible when it comes to YouTube. It is specific content creators that this ends up impacting, and it ends up being a large number of them, but percentage-wise, not so much. And this still matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter because it is a smaller percentage of creators. That's still thousands upon thousands of creators affected by this. Some people, it's their livelihoods. I don't believe in relying on this platform. I don't believe in relying on any of the platforms. The platforms aren't loyal. Why are you? So I really think from a business perspective, always diversify and never rely on a single stream of income, period. I also don't see a future where these platforms become more open, more free, and less restrictive. And I don't see that in a world where the federal government actually cares about social media. In the days gone by, the Wild Wild West, it was largely because people ignored us that were older and of that generation. And so it wasn't taken seriously. Social media was considered a fad that would go away, a trend that wouldn't last. And so no one really bothered to try to come up with legislation for it. That has since changed in the last few years. And so I think that the creators who can adapt to that reality, and a reality where these restrictions and laws and rules are going to happen, I think that those creators will survive and ultimately find a way to win, find a way to thrive. I think people who feel alienated and disenfranchised by some of this tightening of the rules and being forced to color within the lines, I think that they're going to feel more constricted and more restrained as time goes on in terms of what they can and cannot do and still be profitable on the platforms. There will be a place for them on these platforms. There will be a demand for that content. There will be viewers who want those things. It's just not necessarily going to be as practical or profitable to make those things. And I don't really see an answer to it. I do know that there are other platforms that are coming up But when it comes to the idea that eventually it's gonna be regulations, just like any other industry, I don't know that creator-first platforms have any advantages. If anything, I would argue they have disadvantages because they wouldn't have the ability to lobby legislators the way that a conglomerate does. Anyway, that's just kind of my thought from the business side of it. But what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that this is going to be a nothing burger? Or do you think that this is serious? Do you think it's the end of the platform? Let me know in the comment section. Anyway, like this video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. Check out the other awesome content here on the channel. As always, you guys, thanks so very much for watching. And don't forget, go out there and create something awesome today. Hopefully, it doesn't get age restricted. Take care.